Welcome to our webinar on making data effective. This is a webinar from the OfLA project. OfLA stands for Onwards from Learning Analytics, and my name is Pieter-Jan Bonne. Before I get started, I would like to make clear that the work I'm presenting today, I took the lead, of course, and that's why I'm presenting it, but it's work of a lot of people of different institutions. From my own institution, Artevelde University of Applied Sciences, myself, Sophie Herweg, Beatrice van de Kerkhoven, Eva van de Murrebroek, and Veerle van Overberge. At Nottingham Trent University, we've got the valued cooperation of Piet Crownson, Ed Foster, Sarah Lauper, and Rebecca Seidel. At Utrecht, we have Rianne Bouwmeester, Tim Bezemer, and Harold van Rijen. And you can find all our materials on our website. You can also tweet the project at OfLA. Okay, let's get started. In the world of learning analytics, in the field of big data, as it's often called now, we've noticed that a lot of energy and focus was geared towards collecting data, combining metrics, finding the right sort of data to use in a sort of analysis system to spot students at risk or to support decision making in the institution. But we noticed 3 years ago when we started this project that the step from all that data onwards from learning analytics is a step that's been barely researched, and there's been a bit of work here and there, but a sort of institutional approach to what do you do with data and how can you make the best of data, that's something we thought was missing. And that's the focus of our Onwards from Learning Analytics project. We work with a three-stage. The first step in that model is prompts. This is not just the data, but a sort of a notification generated by the data, a sort of remark, a pop-up, something that is sent to staff members, support staff, academia, that informs the risk. Then we have a second step, that's communication. Communication towards the student, informing him or her that he or she is at risk, but also inviting him or her to seek support. And often this is the last step in our model. That's what we call intervention, where you have a sort of a conversation with a student, where you catch up with a student, where you help him or her. If I look at this, this process, these three steps that we're working on, a clear example could be, and this is both online or offline valuable, a tutor observation, for example, or attendance of a student. You see that a student used to show up a lot and then he or she kind of tunes out. You're aware of that, or you are made aware of that through a system, and then you contact that student. It could be via an email informing him or her that, look, we're a bit worried. We saw you a lot on campus, or you were doing good in the learning management system. We saw a lot of quizzes being taken and a lot of material downloads, but you sort of lost track. You zoomed out. We don't know where you are anymore, and we're a bit worried. And we would like you to check in with us, make contact or boost your performance or find a way around the issues you're having, and we're here to help you with that. And then the last step is you invite him or her and you have this conversation where you maybe start from the data saying, okay, you're absent, what's going on and how can we help you? These are the three steps: prompts, which links closely to data, communication, and intervention, mostly a conversation, getting people to interact with staff member. To support the research that we wanted to do in this three-stage model in our project, we asked ourselves the question, how can we make effective use of data in order to better support students? And I'd like to add two nuances, so you're not disappointed. The first one is we're taking an institutional approach here. So we're not looking at a specific course where you would say, this is a French course and you make some exercises and we see you're not very good at the passive or you're not very good at tenses. And we're going to help you with that. Or we analyze data from another course and we see this topic is very difficult. We're going to help you with that. So that's not, we focus on an institutional approach for students at risk. And a second one, and I already mentioned it a bit, is that focus on students at risk. So a lot of this material you could also use to support students who are doing well, to confirm confidence, etc. Our focus is mostly on those students at risk, students that are going to get lost, that are not going to do well, and we're going to try and help them. We started with a literature review where we wanted to see what already exists on learning analytics on the one hand and coaching, supporting, guiding students on the other. And we took a bit of a different approach than normally. We went snowballing through the literature. What does that mean is that we started from existing reviews. We took 2 current data reviews when we did this research at the end of 2018 when we started, and those were Wiberg and Wong, and they made a big analysis of the current status of learning analytics in higher education and also analysis of case studies. And we decided to screen those reviews for articles that reference or link learning analytics to our model. We screened 39 abstracts and we processed 23 articles. And in those 23 articles, 48 case studies are mentioned where data was used for a communication intervention prompt, etc. And 36 of them were unique cases. 1 case was mentioned in 4 papers, 1 case was mentioned in 3 papers, and the rest were only mentioned twice. We've gone through this and we've did some analyses and we came up with 10 pieces of advice in 4 categories. And I think you can guess 3 of those categories, which are of course prompts, communication, and intervention. But we also picked up on another category that we think that's important to mention, which is called institutional context and pedagogy. This will also be the structure for the rest of the webinar, where I'm going to give different pieces of advice, in total 10 for each of the 4 categories. Let's start with the first one, the institutional context or pedagogy. First and foremost, it's important that if you do something like this, working with learning analytics, communicating to students and supporting students with a conversation or an intervention, it's important that you frame your intervention in the pedagogical approach and the institutional context. I'll illustrate this with an example. I know of a case, a very warm, trusting institution, and they started following up on students without the students knowing them. And they sent out emails saying, okay, you're doing this well compared to the group. And it came out of nothing. And it had a sort of a controlling feel, which was very opposed to the sense of identity that the institution had. So there was a lot of protest, a lot of shock also in staff members and in students that this had happened. And it was not because it was a bad initiative. They really had a good intention, but it didn't match with what they wanted to reach. It didn't match with the institution that they was. Often when we read case studies, there's little to no mention of this pedagogical model of intervention. Why do you do this? When there is mention is Tinto, academic and social integration, Draper's work on motivation, we've read Austin and Cuseo's on interaction, staff-student, instructor interaction, and also Swale's determinants of college retention. So it's important that you know what you want to do, how it matches with your institution and the framework you're working from. And the last thing, which is most of all forgotten, is ethics. There is a lack of ethics in the reporting on our work. Are students made aware? Is there a framework that's been given? Is there a sort of consent that has to have been signed? The bare minimum, according to me, is making students aware that they're being tracked and maybe even asking for their permission. And why is this important? You'll see that later. This should be sort of a shared responsibility between staff and students. We'll come back to that later. The second piece of advice in this institutional context and pedagogy is involve and train the end users from the onset to the end. That means involving staff and students from the beginning if you're developing a learning analytics tool. Why? Because they can give you the information that you need to build a good one. In the beginning, we've often seen that decision-making processes in institutions were based on data, which was good, but then they try to use that same platform dashboard data for supporting students and for staff to use, which did not make a good solution for the problems that they were having. They had very different issues. They wanted to see specific data. A student does not need to see per se where he lives or what his age is. He knows this. There's other things that you want to show. It also increases buy-in if you involve them from the beginning. And it also helps you to support them in training. We saw a lot of good initiatives, a lot of voluntary initiatives where staff agreed and wanted to participate voluntarily. But even then, usage was very low of, for example, a learning analytics dashboard. There were thresholds. There were no clear gains often. And by involving them from the beginning, this can be made clear. You can clearly see what they want, what they need. So involving them and training them. A last thing that has a big effect here is that for students, it diminishes the idea of big brother. We're watching you. They've been involved, they know what we're tracking, they can see what we see, etc. That's it for institutional context and pedagogy. Frame your intervention in your pedagogical approach and your institutional context and try and involve the end users from the onset to the end. The second step and the pieces of advice link to the prompts. The prompts automatically generated messages that inform or encourage action. And I think the first thing that we mention here is data. Of course, these prompts are based on data. And nowhere have we found, we have found it once, have as much data as you can. I think what's important here is that you use a combination of data. So not just one metric, not just attendance, but a combination of data. And preferably current data, actionable data, dynamic data, things that students can change. If I were to tell you that you had less chance to pass university or the first year of uni because you were born in New York in the 90s and you have only one parent and no immediate father figure and you were low income class, there's nothing you can change about that. You cannot change the place you were born, your family composition, etc., etc., etc. So it should be something that is actionable. And that's so use a combination of data, including at least actionable and recent data. The data you have, try to make it easily, visually, and continuously accessible for all stakeholders. For me, it's important that students from whom the data is always can see what we know about them, what we work with, and that they can see it themselves. Continuously accessible when they need it. If we want to make students more self-regulatory, that's important. It should be visual. It means also a bit attractive, available, and easily. And there's a lot of different dashboards out there that try and do this. We've got this sort of a line where you can see your progress during the year, color-codedness with yellow, green, red, graphs, barometers that go up and down, meters, all kinds of things. Making it accessible is important. We want students and staff to use them, and we want to help them with that interpretation as well. So it's a bit clear, is this a good thing or a bad thing? And you see, I skipped one. I already hinted at it a bit, but the prompt should lead to action. It's not enough that we just know or are alerted the student is at risk. I think with a prompt also comes a sort of a responsibility. You have to take up that you know that a student is at risk. And maybe you can frame it into sort of certain context, or it can help you. But the bare minimum, which is often very effective, is making students aware that they might be at risk. Informing them that we have some way, that there's something going on and that they might be at risk. Not just offering them also the data, but helping them with the interpretation. This is also a bit what leads to the action, that students can interpret the data themselves. And here the importance of the dashboards is clear, but also of staff, of supporting students, training students in understanding how they should read their. Although effects have been seen on all students, most case studies focus on those students at risk or students not doing so well. In our own research, we've also focused a bit of it on, or we've also included students that are doing well and informing them that they're doing okay, which can also be helpful. But most of the time, the real benefit comes from picking up students quite early that are not doing so well and that we can help. Okay, halfway there. The second one, or the second one in our three-stage model, the third of these 4 categories of advice is communication. Staff should consider contacting students to encourage, explore, and engage. And the communication should supplement rather than replace the staff. Important on this communication is that you make it seem at least that it is customized, personal, tailored to the student. And you can only do this through staff involvement. Some things that pop up there are addressing the student by name, making sure it is sent from somebody rather than from a general email address, learninganalytics@universitythisorthat.com. Sending it on behalf of faculty, on support staff, so there's a person looking for them. Maybe also including the information you've got, why you're worried about them, about their performance, a link to somebody they can touch, somebody preferably that they know or have heard about, rather than a general email address again. It also helps students not to drop into anonymity. So try and make the advice customized or seem customized. Of course, we know there are some limitations, and it's not my goal to have every student be followed up through an individual email sent by an individual piece of staff. There are very many gains to be found in automating this process, but it shouldn't just be an automated process. Staff should also have the final say in when a student is alerted. Maybe because you know he or she has a caretaker responsibility they're taking up at home, and that is the reason why they're not paying a lot of attention to their schoolwork. So have them have this final say about whether or not to send a message. And the last thing is make it not burdensome for the staff, because it relies a lot on staff, and if we make it too much work for them, we're gonna lose them. Seventh piece of advice, the communication again should allow or lead to relevant action. A message like you're at risk and you're probably gonna drop out, mailing you is not enough. There should be something a student can do. And this can go 2 ways. Either a student takes up an individual responsibility and you alert, we noticed this, it would be good if you do this and this and this. And a second thing you do is you invite them for a sort of an intervention, a communication, or third step, where you talk about the student and you try and help and guide them, support them, encourage them. But there should be some action linked to the communication. And the last one is avoid too invasive communication. Don't become your student's stalker. Email has been seen as a very good tool, although we don't always know if it's been read. There have been trials with telephone calling students, but you often got voicemail. It was often a big shock for students. Numbers were not correct. They wouldn't pick up because it's an unknown number. So a lot of effort was lost in trying to reach students. So an email, a message on the LMS, but maybe with a sort of a low threshold to respond, like I've read this, or making an appointment, or a thumbs up, or sort of a thank you thing. So you can kind of track also if they're taking in the information you've said. Again here, why not too invasive? We want students to become self-regulatory. We want them to become the drivers of their own career, the drivers of their own program. And over-penetration with too directive intervention, of course, risks sort of dependency. And it's also bad for metacognition, self-regulatory skills, etc. The last thing I want to remark here is that there have been tries where they've sent multiple emails. I think the conclusion there was if you don't hear back after 2 emails, the case is lost. It either happens on the first one or the second one, but you can send to the other students 10 or 20 emails, nothing's gonna happen. And then we have our last step, that intervention. First advice here is timing is important. We used to have one big piece of data, and that was passing grades for the exams, and we would only have them at the end of the semester, and then it was often too late. Now there's a lot of things we can do early. With early, it's even mentioned within the first 2 to 4 weeks of the semester, especially for first years. You can see if they're coping, if they're doing well. Of course, this depends on the type of intervention. You have different milestones depending on the type of intervention. And so I think the word here to use is timeliness rather than timing. It's in the right place where you can still work on it as a student, not the week before the exam where you say you haven't interacted enough with the material, but rather sooner. And then the last one, if you are going to talk about this data with a student, it's best to use this as a sort of a starting point, a shared starting point, something you've both seen, not something you pop up at the end of the conversation where you say, okay, you've mentioned this, but this is what the data shows, and you're not doing as good of a job as you think. No, data are facts. They're observations, and they can lead to neutral observations like I failed 2 courses, and then they should progress and lead to interpretation. Okay, I failed 2 courses, but I did better than previous semester where I failed 7 courses. And then this could move on to even reflection. And I did better because I started working more during the year and I adopted new strategies and I want to stick with those strategies in the next semester. So really have it as a sort of a conversation, a dialogue. All right, so this was it. We have this institutional context and pedagogy would advise one frame or intervention in the institutional context and involve and train end users from the beginning. For the prompts, use a combination of data, including at least actionable data and recent data. Data should lead to action and should be easily, visually, and continuously accessible for all stakeholders. In your communication, make the advice or the communication seem customized through staff involvement. The communication should lead to something, allow a relevant action, and avoid too invasive communication. And then if you have an intervention, timing is important, also of the communication, but here even more so, and try to use the data to start a dialogue. If I would summarize everything we've done, I think the key here is work with the data you've got, but use it as effectively as you can. A lot of times we have effective support systems for our students or the student body already in place, but they might not find the way. We might not know what students needed. So also again here in our prompt communication intervention, select within the available data you have, try to focus on that recent actionable data. Communicate your concerns and the existed, probably already adapted support to your student cohorts, your student population, and then improve the time you have between student and mentor advisor by knowing what you can see already about a student, by using that data and starting from it to build towards reflection, towards guidance where you can steer a student towards that existing adapted support. Future work, we've done interviews with stakeholders and staff to collect the gray literature, what they have in their mind. That's finished, and we're looking on launching more material on that. We're also having practical studies that we finished this year and we're doing next year. We're working towards training resources for staff, policy recommendations, and guidance on using institutional data. This was it for me. So I took about half an hour to explain those pieces of advice on the institutional scaffolding, prompts with data, communication, and intervention conversation with guidance that we found in these case studies that we analyzed.